Okay, so if we just want to go over and like practice those last two techniques practically, we're just going to do a mini lesson, kind of doing that. So, because I know people like seeing me go through the whole process, so we're going to do like a mini version and kind of approach it that way with just a quick lesson. So I've put another backdrop at the top here for practical part 7. So if you want to follow along with that, you definitely can. So basically, I'm going to do exactly what we did for the kind of glass technique. I'm going to branch this off to the side here and put a transform. And then I'm just going to flip this in the Y. So I'm going to hit the scale and break it into width and height, and then put -1 for the height. You can also use a mirror node if you prefer. So we're going to do that, and then I'm going to blur this image a little bit. And I'm going to another blur and just kind of click the 2 and just slightly blur in the Y. And the next thing I'm going to do is put our glass node, so iGlass. That's a custom node. If you don't have it, you can grab it over here in the custom nodes. So I've put it here. And I'm going to plug that into our image. And we haven't created an alpha yet, so we're going to create an alpha, which is luminance key of the of the scene. Let's put this here, and we'll key it until we see the ground, which is where we want to put these reflections kind of everywhere. So I'm going to make a kind of bright one like this, and plug that into the alpha of the iGlass. So we'll start to see that that has an effect. I'm going to increase this a lot. So the scale distort, I'm going to really start to increase this. Using my up arrow key, and I'm going to increase it to like 2000 or something like that. So we get a crazy effect like this. Essentially now what we do is we plus this over. If I can plug it in. There we go. Plus this over. And we get an effect like this. And now what we want to do is mask it by another luminance key. So essentially, I'm going to do a keyer. And this is a screen. I meant to make a plus. Let me make that a plus. Okay, so put the keyer here. And I'm going to isolate the kind of bricks area. Because we already know, we've already set up our pools of light so that those center areas are going to be brighter. So, and then I'm going to basically plug that in as a mask. So we get something like this. And now if we're plussing that over, it starts to look like we're masking reflections in sort of the brighter areas of our ground. And of course, if you want to adjust where those reflections land, if it's being driven off of a keyer, you could put a grade node before and then just put a rotoshape. Like let's say you want more reflection in this area. You could put a grade node there, and you could brighten it. Let's see here. That should be... Oh, let's put it up here. Sorry. Put it up just a little bit higher. Because this also is using a luminance key. So yeah, let's go to the bottom here. So yeah, if you start to brighten that ground, you're going to start to essentially have more highlights. So if we, like for example, if we take this and we key the highlights, and let's say we want to put more reflection in that area, we can isolate those little bricks and mask that by our roto. So we get an alpha like this, and we just brighten that spot. And when we do that, we're going to start to get more reflections through that area. So if I blur that roto, we can move it around and see exactly what that's doing. So it just kind of helps punch a hole through it if you feel like some areas are not reflective enough or whatever. Obviously, you might need to adjust that look, but just to keep that in mind. So obviously some things are way too sharp right now, and we have reflections going everywhere. So we need to first just put another mask and mask it to the ground. So I'll put a mask, and then I'll just draw a roto shape on the ground plane, and then just blur that slightly. And some areas are working, some areas are not. You can always go in there with an eraser and just erase areas that don't work. And if this was a moving shot, you could do the same. You could erase different areas, and project it. So I'm going to put a stencil and a roto paint, set my brush to all frames, and then just go in here and start to brush away if it's not working in some areas like that. So if there's some areas that are broken, like it's not working with the keyer, you just erase those areas, and no big deal. And also it's kind of speckly, a little bit too speckly, so we can always go up here to our glass. We can always blur that a little bit. We can just blur it very slightly, and that's going to smooth our reflections a little bit. Other thing we can do, let's see. Same with this as well. If this key is making sharp edges, we can always go here and just slightly blur that masking key. So that's going to give us a result like that, and that needs to be probably tweaked and stuff like that. But that's something you'll just have to play around with. You can also take the transform and put another transform here just to make it easier. You can also move that around if you don't like the exact location that your reflections are landing in. So maybe sometimes the reflections won't be in the right spot 100%, because if you're just flipping an image, you're not actually getting the right spot that's reflecting in. So sometimes they need to be moved around. So maybe you'll move some of these reflections up, some of these reflections down, and you could just key mix them together with a key mix. So you could go like this, just to show you. You could key mix these together, and I'll show you. So we say like maybe we need more reflections in this area, and for some reason these lanterns aren't reflecting in the right spot. So we could key mix that together, and then we could just move that reflection into the spot that we want. So like there we go. So if we wanted those reflections to land there, we can move those lanterns in that spot, just using a key mix. So basically we're just doing that. And that's going to be how we can build our reflections out. So go through and do that. And if you get that, we can go on to the next one, which is like part 2. And this would be the frequency separation. So I've basically just pre-comped out my script with the reflections and the contrast adjustments made. So you see this one doesn't have the contrast adjustments that I talked about in the earlier lesson. We can always go in here and do some of that as well. So all I did was a quadratic luma key, or you could use a normal keyer. Again, custom node, you can grab it if you want, but the quadratic luma key I thought worked pretty well. And I just did kind of a quick key there and just found something that I could get some of the darker areas. So I invert this. So I'm isolating the darker areas just to add a little bit more contrast, so it doesn't look so dry. So if I just darken, and of course we want to mask it by the ground because we don't want to affect the whole image. So basically we're just keying the shadows and slightly darkening the midtone, the kind of darker midtones. So this is our alpha. We mask it off. Maybe we'll just adjust that as well, so it's not affecting the highlights. We're only keying the shadows. And when we multiply that down a little bit, you see how it helps out our pings a little bit. It kind of makes them more obvious, bringing that contrast. And then when we add those reflections over, they really stand out versus if we don't have that. Also, it's kind of affecting our key. You see the reflections are starting to move, and you got to be careful about that, because if we go back here and start to darken, it's going to affect this luma keyer and this luma keyer because they're basing off the brightness. So you could put this, if you like how it looks already, the reflections, just do that so that this luma key is not affected. Or you could put it here even. You could put it so neither luma key is being affected. And that'll allow you to just go in there and add contrast where you want it. And if you want it to look really wet, you can darken it more. Obviously you don't want to push it too far, but the more you darken it, the wetter this surface is going to look. And I think that's an awesome technique. for you guys. So yeah, you could do this with a normal key here as well, just to show you. It doesn't have to be the quadratic one. I'm not sure if I even used it or not, but hit invert and then just get rid of the highlights, and you could just plug that one in instead, and it's a pretty similar result. But you see the quadratic, actually, yeah, let's see. Quadratic one does a better job, I would say. It's just the way it falls off. It's just, yeah, I'm just going here. I'm just looking at the difference. Actually, that's because, oops. Yeah, I gotta disable this if I'm using the normal key here. So, okay, there we go. It's almost the same result, actually, so it's not too different. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I'll plug this back in, delete that, keep that here. So obviously this needs to be tweaked. I would go in here and probably erase some of this. Just looks kind of crazy. Probably some of that as well. Doesn't have to be completely reflections everywhere, and maybe some of the reflections are a little bit less because there's less puddle. So you can always go in there and dim it if you just feel like it's too much, or like for example like an oddly placed one here, you can just erase it. Or some of this, like probably just get rid of all that, just so we can keep some reflections. If you don't feel like it's bright enough either, you know, see, look at how bright those are, and you look at how not bright. You could always go in here and just boost the brightness of your picture too, or boost it in certain areas. So I would go in here like that, and I would mask that to the areas that aren't bright enough. So maybe these couple lights here, you just brighten those, and then blur this a little bit like that. So you see now we have that reflection, and they really feel like pretty reflective. So yeah, that's kind of that's the main idea. Now we'll do our glossy reflections with the frequency separation. So we'll go here and blur this image. And just slightly blur it and divide it. So we use the divide operation. Switch it to divide, and then we get this crazy thing here. So we can kind of isolate details. Instead of re-multiplying this back together, as we learned in the last lesson, we could if we re-multiply it, it's going to bring us back to our original image. If this is the right way, if you get this result when you re-multiply, this is backwards. So you just need to press Shift X and switch the A and the B. If you divide it the wrong way and you get some weird result, that's usually because this is opposite of what it needs to be. So just flip it around, and you'll get a result like that. So essentially that's the same as the original image. There's no difference, but we're not going to use the multiply in this. We're just going to take the texture matte, and we're going to invert it. So now we can use this alpha, and maybe we'll just blur it slightly. We're going to use that alpha to mask some scattering reflections on the surface. So let's go here, transform. Actually, let's just copy the transform we already did. We already flipped it. So copy that, put it here. So we got this kind of thing. And I also copy these two blurs that I did. So we can blur our image like that. And then we're just going to mask this image by the high frequency matte that we just created. So I'm going to matte, first of all, we need to put this into the alpha channel, because right now this crazy image is only in the red, green, blue, but if we look at our alpha, it's just solid. So that's not going to mask it, because the mask looks for the alpha channel. So we need to take a shuffle node and shuffle either the red, green, or blue into the alpha channel. So we just plug it like this. And now if we look at the alpha, that same image is there. So now we can mask it, and we get a result like this. So this is going to work for our scattering, and if we plus this over, we get something like this. But maybe what we want to do is blur this image more, because if it's scattering, that's going to kind of scatter further. So these colors are going to scatter further away, because they're less of a pure reflection. So we learned about glossiness. These are the glossy reflections, so they scatter further. So we blur them out like that. So we can get something sort of along the lines of this. Yeah, so I think that's good. The only problem is some of these areas look a little bit weird when it's in the dark areas. So I'm just going here and I'm looking at if we should invert this or not. I'm thinking that maybe we won't invert it, because when we invert it we get these weird areas, the texture matte. So I'm going to keep it not inverted and just leave the alpha looking like that. So I'm going to delete that invert, and then I'm going to play with the blur a little bit as well, because I feel like yeah, I'll just play with that a little bit, and then maybe adjust the gamma as well. So switch the gamma to RGBA. So we want to adjust the way this matte looks in the alpha channel. So RGBA, and then just gamma down a little bit so we can get more texture, and maybe even gain down slightly so you can see something interesting like that. I don't think I did this in my original comp, but I think that actually looks better for the kind of matte that we're trying to create. And we can obviously we can brighten that a little bit if we want, so we can brighten it, and then what we do is take a roto paint and just set it to mask. So now we can just take our paintbrush, set it to all frames, and then set the opacity to 0.1, and then we can just go around our reflection areas where it scatters and just kind of start to paint in like scattering reflections around the puddles and on the surfaces. So that'll give us like really cool scattering kind of glossy reflections on this asphalt area. And it's not a crazy like obvious effect, but it helps, you know, it just helps with that area. We could blur that a little bit too. Maybe it's just a little bit too sharp. It feels like we're sharpening our image a little bit, so we could just slightly blur it. And that's kind of how we get that glossiness across the whole surface. So that's the main technique. If we go back to my comp, let's see how different it looks. I mean, it looks pretty much the same because I used the pre-comp, but you know, yours might not look the same, and it doesn't have to. You know, you see the way I comped to this one, it looks totally different than than my original. And actually, I prefer this. You know, some of the stuff I'm doing the second time around explaining this to you guys, I think is actually better than my original comp. So I guess that happens as well. If you've just done something, you're gonna get a little bit better at it. And I spent a lot of hours doing this matte painting, so figured out various techniques, and some of the techniques obviously I've used many times, but each project is gonna be slightly different than the next. So yeah, so anyways, that's kind of the idea, and we will move on from reflections. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that practical exercise of the theories that we just kind of went over. And yeah,